really excited to be here with Luca from Forrester. I met Luca about probably 4 or 5 months ago now, and what's amazing about his background is his ability to really interact and interface with customers to truly understand their pain points and the impact that technology's had in addressing those pain points. And so when we commissioned this study with Forrester, we had Luca go through and meet with a set of our customers and really pull out the return on investment and impact that we've had on them. And so, Luca, I'm excited to be here with you. My background: I'm the co-founder and CEO of Horizon 3. I started my career off as a software engineer at IBM. I was a CIO within GE Capital and the CTO of Splunk, and then left industry to serve within the U.S. Special Operations community. If you go to the next slide, and within every one of my jobs, I had no idea I was secure until the bad guys showed up. Are we fixing the right vulnerabilities? Are our security tools actually configured and working properly? Does our SOC have the right monitoring and alerting set up on the right events? Do our people know how to actually respond to a breach when one occurs, and so on? And the answer is, we don't know. We have to wait for a breach to find out. Or the alternative is to pay consultants to come pen test us once a year, where they'd show up, phone us within a few hours, hand us a PDF report that looked just like last year's report, and then walk away. And what we really wanted to do was rethink this entire notion of continuously verifying your security posture. So if you go to the next slide, the underlying principles that we applied in each of those jobs that I had and that underpin what we do with NodeZero at Horizon 3 is that a good security program assumes breach. There's just way too many doors and windows for the attacker to get in. And once they're in, how can they achieve an objective, whether it's become domain administrator, compromise sensitive data, borrow within the network so they can attack at a later time? And how do you assume breach from different perspectives? What if they compromise the DMZ? What can they do? What if they compromise the guest network or the trusted zone or so on? The second big realization I had in each of those jobs and what we've seen with our customers is that attackers don't have to hack in using 0 days like you see in the movies. Often they're logging in with credentials that they've harvested through a variety of techniques. And that credentials are the new RCE, the new remote code exploitation. And it's far more important to understand and reduce your credential attack surface than any other attack surface that you have. And then finally, for every patch Tuesday, there should be a pen test Wednesday. Your frequency of testing should be at least as often as your frequency of change. And my former commander in special operations used to say, don't tell me we're secure, show me. And then show me again next week, and then show me again or tomorrow and show me again next week, because our environment is constantly changing and the adversary always has a vote. So what we wanted to understand was our exploitable attack surface and how that changed over time. And the model we built out that we've now operationalized within NodeZero is that you're able to run a self-service pen test to find those exploitable attack paths. We're able to clearly articulate how to fix those problems and give you a starting point for how to automate those fix actions as appropriate. And then once you've fixed it, you can verify that the issue's been remediated, and you can also verify that your security tools properly detected and responded. And this is the cycle that our customers end up executing in, where they shift from 1 or 2 pen tests a year to 40 or 50 pen tests a month. If you go to the next slide. And when you think about what's incredibly interesting in the role of AI and penetration testing is this idea of autonomous versus automated. So think of when IBM played Garry Kasparov in chess a bunch of years ago. IBM didn't hard code 40 million chess games. They looked at every piece on the board to determine the next best action. And the more games they played, the smarter their decision-making algorithms became. And that's the underlying architecture of NodeZero. The more pen tests we run, the smarter we get. We're able to do so in a way that doesn't require credentialed agents to be installed anywhere. You don't have to write your own custom attack scripts or maintain them. You don't have to go off and hire consultants or professional services to do the pen testing. The whole concept is self-service, arming your IT admins and network engineers with the ability to run pen tests in a way that is safe for production at scale across your entire environment. If you go to the next slide. What's really important is not just showing me where the problem is, but telling me exactly what the attack path was that allowed the attacker to achieve the objective. So in this example from our product, NodeZero started on a particular IP address, the .200, conducted recon and enumeration, was able to exploit a misconfiguration in a JMX server, not a CVE, but a misconfig, which is equally important to attackers. After getting code execution, was able to drop a remote access tool on that box, and then subsequently dump SAM, grab an NTLM hash, and use that to become domain admin. And this is a very typical attack path where no CVEs were used in this attack path. So this is not going to get picked up by a vulnerability scanner because it's not a CVE, number one. And number two, it's chaining multiple issues across multiple machines, which is exactly how attackers operate. But don't just show me the attack path. If you look in the bottom left, here's the command we actually ran to get code execution on that JMX server. So if you don't believe us, you can copy and paste and run that command yourself. And then don't just tell me what the path is in the proof, tell me how to fix it. So if you click on that view details, we'll actually walk through the different options available for how to fix that particular problem. And we'll also make it super easy for you to rerun a very targeted pen test to verify that that problem has been fixed. And if you go to the next slide, what you're able to do as a CIO is understand your exploitable attack surface and how it has changed over time. And what I want to understand is how quickly are we fixing problems and how often are they reoccurring? And those are the metrics I care about as a CIO and as a CTO. And within the product, you're able to quickly understand from one pen test to another, how many problems did you fix? How many new problems were added? How quickly did you fix them? Were they mitigated or not? You're able to have a very targeted conversation with your organization as a result. So I'll end with my section on the following slide, which is very typical adoption of our customers, where they shift from running 1 or 2 pen tests a year hiring consultants to running as many pen tests as they possibly can from different perspectives. And if you look on the right, the more pen tests they run in blue, the more problems they find in orange. But they end up hitting this inflection point where suddenly they're able to proactively and rapidly reduce that backlog of exploitable weaknesses. And that inflection point is often when the red teams and the blue teams stop hating each other and actually work together to build a purple team culture. And they embrace this find, fix, and verify cycle. So I'll end there and tee it up for Luca, because with this background, what Luca was able to do is interview 4 customers that shared their experiences and stories adopting NodeZero over the past couple of years, and started to bring a lot more economic value to the narrative I just described. So Luca, on to you.
Thank you, Snehal. All right, so before we get started, just to reintroduce myself, my name is Luca Sun. I am part of Forrester's Total Economic Impact practice. So a few disclosures to get us started. We are an independent practice. We are not here to endorse Horizon 3 NodeZero, but rather we're here to say that based on our findings and our analysis from speaking to actual customers, this is the total economic impact that we saw. Okay. So I'm going to start off very high level, give you a little bit of a TEI 101 to understand what in the world we are trying to accomplish here today. So first and foremost, the TEI, or total economic impact, is a proven methodology that Forrester has been using for over 20 years to help our clients justify technology investments. Now, within this methodology, we have 4 main pillars. The first one are the benefits. These are the positive outcomes that a technology investment incurs, and that ultimately boil down to cost savings and revenue generation from a quantified perspective. But this also extends further into qualitative benefits around operations, customer experience, reduced risk, and much more. Then we measure the costs, inputs that it takes to realize these benefits. Third, in the flexibility section, we capture the future possibilities that are enabled by making an investment decision today. And then lastly, we account for risk, or any inherent risk that underpins technology investments. So this is the project approach that we take to arrive to our final analysis. We begin with our due diligence, we talk to customers, We create a composite organization, and I'll explain what that is shortly, and a financial model, and then we write the case study. The most important part of this methodology, at least in my eyes, is we speak to customers who have experience using NodeZero and have had a measurable impact on their organization that they could share with us. Our goal for the study is that you learn about their journey, you learn about our financial framework, and that you take the insights you hear today, continue or consider investigating further with a case study, and then create that business case for your organization and your specific characteristics. Okay, so let's start here with the organizations and the interviewees that we spoke to that we use for the foundation of our analysis. First, we spoke to 6 different organizations, or interviewees rather, within 4 organizations using NodeZero. These organizations range from entertainment, manufacturing, healthcare, construction, and had a wide range of annual revenue from $500 million to $1.5 billion. Those are the high level characteristics. Snehal, is there anything else that stood out to you about these customers or any similarities that might resonate with our audience today?
I think the other key thing is IT and security tended to be the same function, where or they had just built out their security team as a first-time CISO in the organization. And what was also, I think, pretty consistent is, at least when we started to engage with them, they were barely treading water. And I think you're going to talk about that in more detail. But that IT and security were really close hand in hand. They did not have an offensive pen testing team, for instance. It was IT admins, network engineers, and a nascent security team that had to oversee security of the entire organization.
That's certainly a narrative we heard. These were lean teams, which makes the impact just that much more impactful, and we'll jump into that shortly. But before we can talk about that impact, we first want to understand what the prior state was for these organizations, such that we can understand where they're coming from and where they are now with NodeZero. So first and foremost, organizations that we spoke to, or interviewees within those organizations, didn't have an automated penetration testing solution like NodeZero. Instead, they relied on third-party consultancies for annual pen tests and other solutions like their vulnerability scanners within their vulnerability management program to ensure that they are addressing everything they need to. With this prior environment, there were several shared challenges. And the first one really revolves around those third-party penetration tests. First, they were expensive and cost prohibitive ultimately to scale beyond an annual basis. The next part of that is these tests were inconsistent depending on which consultancies or agencies they hired and depending on the tools that those consultancies use. And then third, customers told us that frankly, some of these insights that they received were ineffective. They were either a list of CVEs or didn't help identify which attacks were truly a threat to the environment. And that leads us to our next challenge here, the lack of exploitable vulnerabilities prioritization, both with the third-party tests as well as other vulnerability management solutions led to gaps in insight. But more specifically, there was more noise, false positives that these tools would identify and ultimately create additional operational burden for the security analysts or resources whose job it is to validate whether these claims are truly a risk and to eventually remediate these vulnerabilities. Lastly, the third core challenge that these customers shared with us was similar along the last theme, siloed tools that underperformed. They noticed that there were gaps or there were missing vulnerabilities or exploits that simply wasn't brought to their radar or nested underneath a whole list of noise that they couldn't sort through effectively.
If I could jump in, I think the 2 key themes that we saw earlier with these customers is being vulnerable doesn't mean you're exploitable. So just because you have a vulnerability doesn't mean the attacker can exploit it. And what was critical was making sure you fixed problems that were actually exploitable in the environment. The second thing that I think, building on your point here, Luca, is these organizations wanted a sparring partner. They wanted a way to spar, the SOC to spar with a real attacker so they could tune their tools accordingly to make sure they were getting the most value out of the security investments they were making on the defensive side.
Thank you. All right, here's a quote from a CIO we spoke to in a construction organization. He said, the individual cost to run a pen test was significant. It wasn't something that we had the luxury of doing whenever we could remediate. The cost of the old model just didn't scale. We couldn't afford to do it 3 or 4 times a year. And this quote here really underpins and articulates this organization's pain point, who, quite frankly, they wanted to be able to scale, as Snehal mentioned earlier in the conversation, to multiple times and continuously verify their posture. And so that's a theme that we'll hear throughout this presentation. Okay. Next, we have our solution requirements. You can think of this as the catalysts that drove the investment in NodeZero. These are the flip side of the key challenges and really the reasons why interviewees chose NodeZero. First was interviews needed to improve their security posture, and by automating penetration testing, that was a secure and sure way to do so. Next, they needed a solution that could continually test and verify their environments to scale their penetration tests. So oftentimes in their prior environments, they would get a list of vulnerabilities, CVEs from their third parties, implement whatever remediations they could, and lo and behold, the following year, they would see some of the same vulnerabilities that were just identified. And so really, they couldn't test if they were really making an impact to their security posture when it came time to remediation and fixes. The next requirement here was to prioritize those exploitable vulnerabilities so that they can, 1, secure their environment, of course, but 2, focus the time and attention of their valuable security teams' productivity, let's say. And that leads us to our last point, improving efficiency of security operations, improving the impact, the complexity of scans that they can run, and so on. So these were core themes that we heard, and we'll talk about the benefits shortly. But before we do so, here's another quote from an information security engineer. NodeZero gave us a lot of insight into our environment that we probably never knew about before. We were able to gain insight, find devices, and implement policies much faster. It reduced the amount of time that we would have had to spend on analyzing and remediation, so that we can work on newer projects and start making leaps to make our technology better. Here's another quote from the director of IT security. Horizon 3.ai has made a ton of additional enhancements. And when you get the vulnerability, you just look at it, and you get the details. They're all there. All right, so now we've talked about some of the pain points, some of the challenges. Hopefully that resonates, or hopefully might be the wrong word there, but that may resonate with your organization, some experiences that you have. The next part of understanding impact is really creating a business case. And to do so, we first created what we call a composite organization. This is a hypothetical organization that resembles and mirrors the customers that we spoke to and their organization's characteristics. With this composite organization, we then assign and create the financial analysis using the data points that we got from customers. So to walk through very quickly through the characteristics here, the composite organization is a North American-based organization with $500 million in annual revenue with about 2,000 employees. On the security side, they have 5,000 IPs that are being covered by NodeZero and a security team of 4 FTEs who wear many different hats, but of course, penetration testing and red teaming plays into their realm of responsibility. Okay. So all in all, in our 3-year analysis, so we measure this over 3 years, we found a return on investment of 63%, a total benefits of $809,000. And when you subtract the total cost, you get a net present value of $312K. And so you can think of that net value as a total value of additional value that's quantified by investing and using NodeZero. Those three, or these metrics are underpinned by 3 key value categories that we'll spend the next few slides going into. They're improved security operations productivity, avoided third-party penetration test costs, and then reduced vulnerability scanner costs. Within the study, we go into more detail on how we've calculated this, and we give you a framework and tables that you can apply to your own organization. So again, if you can, get your hands on the study, take a look through, and help use that as help to create your own business case. For now, I'm going to hit on the high-level benefits here of the quantified section. All right, so here we have our first quantified benefit, which captures how NodeZero impacted the operational efficiency of security teams. This is one way to think about it is an indirect cost. It might not come up to the top of your mind when looking at the total TCO, but is a really strong value proposition of NodeZero. And so we heard that security teams within these lean organizations or lean security teams saved time and were more productive in several ways. First, customers automated scanning, scheduling, and ultimately, in a higher level, removed a lot of the manual and tedious tasks that were involved with managing pen tests. Second, by identifying vulnerabilities that were exploitable, NodeZero helped organizations save time filtering, triaging, and validating vulnerability findings. In addition to that, the remediation guidance that NodeZero provides reduced research time and helped remediation teams with patching efforts. And then finally, more from the thematic perspective, because organizations could scale the number of penetration tests to make this a continuous endeavor, this meant ultimately that security teams could identify and remediate vulnerabilities faster, more frequently, which prevents incidents and breaches from occurring and saves time on the back end with incident response. All in all, speaking to these 4 organizations, we found that on average, our composite organization saves 30% of their security team's time, meaning that their team can reinvest those time savings into other valuable, into other strategic tasks. For example, they could increase the complexity of scans and how deep, so to speak, they're going with their penetration tests. In total, over the course of 3 years, these time savings amounts to $348,000 in total labor. This quote here, I'll read this one. I like this second part here. We could automate many of the functions that we would like to spend more time on, but didn't have time to do. NodeZero allowed us to do more complex scans and things without learning other vulnerability programs. And that's a key theme here. It's almost as if NodeZero played the additional role or a technological role of a red team resource without having to hire that headcount or any additional headcount. Okay. Moving on to our second benefit category, this is another quantified benefit that is definitely more of a hard dollar savings, and that is from reducing or entirely avoiding third-party penetration test costs. Interviewees noted that NodeZero either reduced the frequency of third-party testing to once every 2 years, as one example, but several customers shared that they fully replaced third-party penetration tests and those outsourcing, let's say, engagements. This allowed organizations to save anywhere between $60,000 to $200,000 that they would spend for just one penetration test. And as we spoke about before, The kicker is that while there are hard cost savings of avoiding these tests, the additional benefits of NodeZero, of being able to scale additional pen tests at no marginal costs, is really the point to drive home here. That helps them provide better insight into their security posture and drive faster time to insight and time to remediation. So all in all, with our analysis, we found that our composite organization avoids about 95% of third-party penetration costs because directly attributable to Horizon 3. This amounts to $255,000 in savings over 3 years. Okay. And then in our third and final quantified benefit category, we identify another hard cost savings, which was reduced vulnerability scanner costs. Customers noted that vulnerability scanners were, ineffective at prioritizing critical vulnerabilities, let's say, and created extra work for security teams to understand, triage, and remediate vulnerabilities. After turning on NodeZero, customers uncovered gaps with their coverage, or simply realized it was too much work to sort through the noise after seeing what NodeZero could provide them in terms of insights. So what we heard and what our composite organization realizes is they augment their vulnerability scanning by using NodeZero, which replaces 65% of that usage and the associated costs of those vulnerability scanners. So to our composite, this is worth over $206,000 over 3 years. Okay, and to wrap up the quantified section, we uncovered $497,000 in costs, which are subscription costs for the composite organization. Now, one thing I'll mention here is that, let's read this quote here from the information security engineer. It says, he told us, it takes around 25 to 30 minutes to fully implement a NodeZero container or NodeZero image in our environment. In executive speak, it's instantaneous. And that's really the story we heard across customers. There was no heavy upfront implementation or resource time it took to get NodeZero up and running and finding value. So another, let's say, positive within this cost. Okay, and to recap, based off of those 3 categories that you just saw, the return on investment for investing in NodeZero is 63%, net benefits of 809,000, and NPV, or net present value, of 312K. In financial speak, any investment that's over $0 in NPV or has a positive ROI is a green light. And then I'll read this quote here from our director of IT security, who said, by having NodeZero in place and constantly running, you can constantly take care of updates and fixes. Okay, so we just covered the quantified benefits, but as we know, especially within the realm of security and security solutions, there are a plethora of qualitative benefits that are simply difficult to calculate or extend beyond quantified territory or the quantified domain. And these qualitative benefits could be just as important, if not more important, to factoring in your technology investment decision. So I'll cover some of these. We have 8 outlined today, and I'll cover them just at a high level. Our first one here is continuous verification of security posture to confirm weaknesses. We've been speaking about this throughout the presentation, but ultimately interviewees could orchestrate additional pen tests at no marginal costs, allowing them to continuously verify their security posture and proactively work to fix exploitable vulnerabilities. Another benefit, Snehal mentioned this earlier with that inflection point, but the more comfortable and the more experience that customers had engaging with NodeZero, that drastically decreased the number of severe, high, and even medium level vulnerabilities to the point where it's in, hey, before we had this number of high level vulnerabilities in our environment, now that's practically down to by 90% for the case of one customer. The next unquantified benefit here are the remediation time savings. The level of insight that NodeZero provided the interviewees really did help in saving additional time on the remediation steps. Third, improvements in the vulnerability management program with NodeZero meant that organizations could decrease the chances and the risk, ultimately, of data breaches. And as we all know, the costs of remediation, brand damage, and legal costs are very considerable. And so this is another qualitative benefit that, of course, factors into any security investment. And then lastly here, NodeZero helped interviewees report and convey their security posture to internal teams, to executives, to partners, and even to customers to elevate their security awareness, generate stakeholder buy-in, improve brand perception, expedite customer deals in one instance, and more. So I just outlined four. Snehal, are there any of these that stand out to you more so than the others, or that you want to speak to? And if not, otherwise we'll jump into the next set of unquantified benefits.
Yeah, I'll just jump in and talk about sensitive data exposure. This is a really big deal in that one of the things NodeZero is able to do is identify ways to compromise your sensitive data. And it'll actually show you, these are the databases we gained access to or file shares. These are the sensitive files we found, including, for instance, your key store files or credential files for your cloud environments and so on. And being able to do this sensitive data discovery at scale was a wish list item I had in my CIO and CTO roles. And the fact that it's scouring your environment for sensitive data it can compromise through a variety of techniques is a pretty important outcome for every CIO and CISO. The other thing in here that's not listed is self-identified findings reports. So when I was a CIO, the first thing an auditor would ask me is, hey, what problems did you find yourself and fix yourself? And if your answer was none, you kind of started off on the wrong foot with that auditor. And so customers are using us to help answer that self-identified findings question by auditors, where they say, well, here are all the pen tests we ran, here are all the findings, critical impacts, here's how quickly we fixed them, and here's proof that they were actually remediated. And you end up completely changing the narrative and relationship with the auditor because they view you as being proactive versus reactive in your security posture.
Absolutely. All right, moving on to our last slide of qualitative benefits here. As I teased out earlier, NodeZero helped accelerate vendor risk assessment with potential customers reviewing vendor status. We have strong vendor partnership and support. That was an important aspect of really facilitating a strong relationship with a vendor and feeling like their problems are being addressed and even maybe contributing to some of the road mapping efforts here. This next item is a really fascinating story that we heard from just one customer who had recently acquired a new entity in a mergers and acquisition deal, and said that their organization would have needed triple the number of security professionals working twice as long to remediate the additional environment if it weren't for NodeZero. So while this wasn't quantified in our benefits section, if this is something your organization is currently going through or may go through in the future, or even if you're just going to extrapolate that level of impact, you can assess how impactful NodeZero can be to your organization. And then finally, interviewees shared that NodeZero streamlined their operations and productivity. And as a result of that, as a result of streamlining some of the tedious tasks, let's say, they had in their prior environment, that improves their overall employee experience. They feel like they're contributing more to their posture, and they feel like, for example, having ideas of which vulnerabilities are truly exploitable actually ties some meaning and significance to the effort they're putting into addressing and remediating those vulnerabilities. And then lastly, just one final quote here to end our conversation and support some of the qualitative benefit. The NodeZero reports have been used not only with our C-level folks, but we also have shared the executive report findings with potential customers and other customers if they are doing review of our vendor status. So the benefits here really do transcend just the security side, but also helps on that customer front, like you can see here. All right, and then I'll pass it off to Snehal. If there are any questions, please feel free to drop them in the Q&A chat, and Snehal will lead us through some of those.
Outstanding. One, thank you, Luca, for just a phenomenal job putting this report together. Just the level of detail and the fact that it was completely impartial, right? Our ability to influence the results was minimal, if non-existent altogether. And so it's just refreshing for us as well to understand where we could also double down on our own value and efforts. There was one additional use case that I thought was really interesting that's starting to emerge since the study, which is organizations, especially in manufacturing, that leverage lean manufacturing and just-in-time logistics. They are very sensitive to the stability of their critical suppliers, many of whom are small and medium-sized businesses and others. And so now they're starting to use us as part of their vendor risk or supplier risk assessment process, where they're demanding the last 2 pen test reports from NodeZero from their critical suppliers, not to see the current state of weaknesses, but rather how many issues in report 1 were remediated in report 2 or reoccurred in report 2. And it's, I think we're going to see a fundamental change in vendor risk assessments and supplier risk assessments over the next few years as autonomous pen testing becomes the standard that's out there. So with that, thank you so much for your time. There is one question out there for you specifically, and which is, Luca, how can I use the case study to determine what my company's benefits and ROI might be if we invest in NodeZero? So I'd love to have you talk through how to use the TEI report for current customers and prospects.
Yeah, that's a great question. Really gets down to, well, we just spent 30 minutes listening to findings. How the heck can we prove this out to my internal stakeholders? So question received loud and clear. The first thing to do is get your hands on the study so that you have something in front of you. And within each of the quantified benefits, you'll see the financial tables. And within this conversation today, we pulled out what those key, we call levers are. So for example, we had the 30% time savings across your security operations teams. Chances are your characteristics vary. You might have more or less individuals. However, the framework still it applies. So think through the number of SecOps people that you have that are being leveraged in this domain, and then apply that 30%. See what type of time savings that applies to your organization and how that relates to the data points uncovered from the customers that we've spoken to who do have use and experience using NodeZero. That same example can apply with your the rest of the benefits. So especially with your annual third-party penetration test cost, you know what that line item is. And as you reach efficiency, you can start projecting out, do I really need to conduct these on an annual basis? Do I really need to keep conducting these when I have something like NodeZero that not only checks those boxes, but provides us just additional value that we've spoken about today?
Excellent. So I've been answering in the chat questions as they come in. So you can go off and see some of those. I'll just read one of the answers I put out there right now, which is a vulnerability scanner needed in addition to this? And the answer is actually, for many of our customers, they either completely reduce their vuln scanner licenses or cut out their vuln scanners altogether. Just because being vulnerable is less important than understanding where you're exploitable. And I think, Luca, you talked about that in some of your benefits. But for certain industries, vuln scanning and using an approved scanning vendor is still a requirement. And in those scenarios, you're able to use the NodeZero API to pull out our results and decorate your vulnerability management process, where you say, the vuln scanner found this issue and NodeZero was successfully able to exploit it. And so you can use us in a way to decorate and enhance your existing vulnerability management program if you've got one that's robust and mature and already in place. A couple of other questions that have come out here. Have we seen any pushback from auditors on autonomous tests versus traditional manual testing? We have not seen any pushback on SOC 2. PCI explicitly requires a human certified pen tester. So we're actually going to launch a new offering in February where we have one of our certified ethical hackers click the button and run the pen test for you. That way we meet the that particular requirement. But we have not seen pushback from auditors on using our results as part of that audit. Another question, are we considering expanding into web application pen testing? Our sweet spot and bread and butter is infrastructure pen testing. So everything below custom code. It's really hard to use algorithms to find logic flaws in custom applications. But there are a whole bunch of aspects of web pen testing or app pen testing that are fairly common. So cross-site scripting attacks and so on and so forth. And we continue to invest in covering as much of that as possible. But to get into custom code logic flaws, that's where humans are just far superior. And so use humans as a scalpel for diving deep into specific application problems, and then use NodeZero to do infrastructure pen testing at scale. And a question here on licensing. We do host-based licensing. That's the dominant model amongst our customers. So the number of live IPs that were incorporated into the pen test. So you could give us a /8, but if only 100 IPs responded, your license is for 100 IPs. And so it's for live IPs within the pen test. So I think I've answered all the questions here. Any final comments, Luca? And once again, I really want to thank the amazing work and for those out there looking to get a very impartial view of return on investment. I think the Forrester TI report is a fantastic way to do it. And it's absolutely worth the money. And we got a phenomenal expert in Luca devoted to this project for a few months. And it was a pleasure working with you on that.
Snehal, you as well. Thank you so much for having me.
Okay. Thanks, everybody.